Okay, so I guess we're getting ready to go. Is the press all in?
Yeah, press is in.
Okay, so I guess we'll just go. So we are here for the Finance Committee meeting, Wednesday, March the 6th, 2024. I'd like to start with to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin Nation, as well as all Coast Salish First Nations, on whose territories we have the honor to live, including my home on Ho'ete, also known as Laskidi Island, and the First Nations who call Richmond their home. We have an agenda before us. Does anyone have any changes they would like to make? And if there are none, would someone like to move adoption of the agenda? Okay, Director Lennox, Director McCormick, any discussion on this? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you, Director Dowd. Carried. None opposed. So we have minutes from February the 6th. Are there any changes or omissions that anyone has found? And if I don't see any, would someone like to move adoption of those minutes? Director Lennox and Director Brander, thank you. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, carried. Okay, we have unfinished, so no delegations. Unfinished business, we have a 10-year tax rate summary, which was requested from the January 24th meeting. And so the recommendation is to accept this. What would the committee like to do?
Move the recommendation.
Move the recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Director McCormick. Okay, discussion on this item. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. So the 10-year summary just talks about rates. There's no totals or information about average household, and it's not combined with the valuations so as to figure out what the trend is. And I think we were looking for the 10-year summary to also include totals. And I'm wondering, is that still coming, or did it get missed somehow, or what's up with that?
Okay, so let me hand this over to Ms. Greenan. Do you have an answer for that? So I guess the question is that I guess the request was for the rates which are provided, which was great, and a similar table with the amounts of the requisitions.
Thank you, Chair. The other amounts with the requisitions that was missed. When staff received the motion, I looked at it thinking that you wanted the same tax rate summary that we had provided previously. And so we updated those rates and provided that, and missed that there was a new report that was requested.
Thank you. And is that something very difficult to provide that may come forward, say, at the board meeting in 2 weeks, Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is something that is difficult to provide. So that would take, we estimate approximately 3 days of staff time to create that new document.
Okay, so substantial before we so we have this on our agenda committee. What I would suggest is, if we want further information, that we make a motion to request it, given that it takes at least to confirm that that's what we want. We didn't know that it would take this much effort, but what is the will of the committee? Or I can't quite see. Let me
Here.
So Director Elliott, yes.
So I think there's already a motion that talks about this. So I don't think we need a motion. I think we just need to find out when the motion will be completed. If the committee is recommending the motion be changed or withdrawn or some such thing, that's a different process than having another motion when there's already one adopted.
Quite correct. So if so I guess that would maybe I'll pass it back over to Ms. Greenan. So if the committee carries on and would like this information, then what might be a reasonable time frame to receive it?
Thank you, Chair. I would say a reasonable time frame would be that it comes to the a May Finance Committee, because we're quite busy right now. We have the audit, we have the auditors in actually this week. Then we'll have to complete the financial statements, and we have to do the updates to the budget. And then then we also have to do lots of reporting that has to happen at the early April, and then we'll get you the financial statements. So that means that in April we could start on this work and have it for the May agenda. But we would, just so you're aware, this wasn't something that was in our work plan. We will have to have staff do that in overtime.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Greenan. So any further discussion on this, Director Gisborne?
Thank you. Yeah, I recall the motion that was put forward to the board back in January. And it read that the board directs staff to update the 10-year tax rate summary for 2014 to 2024, and that the board directs staff to produce a similar document that contains the total contributions. The reason that was put on the January agenda was we were going through the financial planning process as a board, and there's a lot of concern around the total cost of services and service delivery. And over a 10-year period, taking a look at the tax rate, which is based on per 100,000, can be a little bit confusing because property values change fairly dramatically. And for our decision-making process, looking at total amounts, I think is very helpful to then ask the question, what changes? Sometimes the changes are, a significant grant allocation, or there's a new provincial requirement. But when you see these fairly significant changes, it gives the board members a bit more of an idea of where to look in our document center, where something came up maybe 6 years ago. Because, some of us are in our first term, some of us are in our second term. So that's why that motion was put forward back in January, and then the board adopted that motion. When we got into the February Finance Committee meeting discussion, the information was incomplete. And at that time I said, well, let's have another Finance Committee meeting to discuss our financial plan so we can get that information and move the financial planning process by another month, because we were originally planning to have it done by the end of February. Now we're planning to have it done by the end of March. The information has still not been, provided or clarified. I sent an email last Sunday, and just to clarify, the email that I sent was, pointing out that the total contributions aren't there, but also my understanding that the motion was not a motion to refer. So this item on the agenda comes up as unfinished business. There was no motion to refer it to this committee meeting from January. This is information that was requested. So I don't understand the procedure as to why it's showing up as unfinished business and a motion to refer, because the board didn't do that. My understanding of procedure is once the board passes a motion, it's the job of the chair to ensure that the staff are, implementing those recommendations. And then if there's issues, the chair can bring it back to the committee to say, hey, there's some kind of issue. So the motion that we have in front of us is that the Finance Committee accept the updated 10-year tax rate summary, which is half of what was requested back in January. But I would almost even argue that it's kind of out of order because it's not an item referred from the board. It's not an unfinished business. I don't understand why it's like this. My understanding is once the document is produced, it can just be put on an agenda as an FYI item. So I don't understand how we're dealing with this. It's kind of a weird process and procedure. And I sent the email on Sunday, and I haven't gotten any response back from the chair or other members of the board. So.
Well, so the title of the item says referred, which, if our corporate officer might be able to provide clarity on that, but the substance of the motion doesn't refer to that. The effect of the request from the board, or the direction from the board, was to request for this information. We've got part of it as we've discussed, and that's basically, we could consider this motion on the table to accept what's been provided, and we have expectations of receiving the rest of it in May. as described by our manager of financial services. Is there any further discussion on this item? Director Gisborne?
Okay, well, in that case, I'm actually going to vote against accepting it because I'll vote in favor of accepting it when it's complete. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. Getting the report from the manager of financial services that the cost of, I guess, fulfilling the previous motion, finding out that it's going to take 3 days of staff time to do so, it concerns me because that's quite a bit of staff time, quite a bit of money to do it. I'm wondering if there's an easier way for the finance department to provide us with the information that is requested from some of the board members. For instance, could it just be total requisition, or does it have to be detailed and broken out by area, or is there some way to make this an easier process to go through?
Right. Maybe Ms. Greenan can help. Is there other information that would be easier to produce that might provide the clarity that's being requested? Ms. Greenan?
Thank you. I think the difficulty is I'm trying to, we need to know what the board is looking for. So if you're looking for, it's just the amount of tax as a total that has been requisitioned over the past 10 years, or if you're looking for, I think the request, if I recall, was for the amount of tax from each electoral area in the city for the last 10 years for each service, all broken down by service.
Yeah, I think that's the motion. Director Brander, and then I see Director Dout. Director Brander, carry on.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if we can, I guess, take some of the challenge out of the request. So not break it down by individual service, but maybe have it be total requisition, or at the very most, just for every area plus the city. It sounds like that would be a much easier request to fulfill and take much less time. So I don't know if anybody else would like to weigh in on that, but I know Director Dout has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you for that. Director Dout?
Yeah, I'm sensitive to what staff is saying is a significant cost to provide this extra detailed information. What we have here, that makes sense to me, is the tax rates per 100,000 for each one of the areas and sub areas going back for 10 years. And that, I think, gives us a really good outline of what's changed in the taxation. And what I do when I want to know exactly what the tax proportion was for the city last year and the year before, I go back to the minutes that are online and the different financial statements online, where all the information is there to go and get out. I think this is valuable as it is to show a historical change in the tax rates, and to me that's enough information. I really don't think we're getting much bang for our dollar when we ask for 3 days of overtime from staff people to provide another report on information we can already find.
Thank you, Director Dout. No, I'll add myself to the list. If this information was easy to provide, I'd be really in favor of it. But given that it would be 3 days of staff time and it won't come in time for us to consider for this year's budget, it seems to be a poor use of staff resources, in my view. If we, I would be in favor of either putting forward a motion of considering a motion to not ask for that second piece, or as Director Brander suggested, a summary by area, which would similar this. We already get each year the summary by area we see for each electoral area and for the city. So it's kind of that kind of information, but going back 10 years, that strikes me as something that would be feasible. It wouldn't be that much effort to provide, and we give a high level snapshot in conjunction with the 10-year details that we do have. But that's Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I see no problem with approving the motion that is before us. We can certainly accept what is here. And if there is a need for further information, then I think that should be a subsequent motion. I echo the comments of others who are sensitive to staff time. When you add up the cost of 3 days of staff salary, is that really worth this further bit of information, which personally I'm quite satisfied with the information we've received. So, Chair, I believe we should carry on and support the motion before us. And then after that, if people want to move other things, then so be it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Elliott, I believe your hand was up, and then hopefully we can get this to vote. Director Elliott?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'm really used to the way we do things at the city because I've been there a little longer. Rates per 100,000, I'm thinking are super useful when we're trying to figure out stuff. Is the mill rate set very similarly in the regional district to what happens in the city, which means that once you get the total roll and you know what your total budget is, you set the mill rate? Or is this per 100,000 set before you know the total evaluations? And I guess I'm asking that question because for me, the amount per 100,000 is less useful to know than the actuals that come in either by Representative House or by totals, just because without knowing what those valuations are doing at the same time, I can't really, it doesn't necessarily provide me a good sense of what's going on. So just my question about that.
Okay, Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. That the per $100,000 rate that you're seeing is the mill rate. It's just on per $100,000 basis rather than a $1,000 basis. And the other thing is we do also provide the rates, the amounts per household. That is the rate that is set. We do provide the rates per household in the financial plan. Yeah. The complication here is that we want also 9-year historical rates. Okay. So it's adding those 9-year historical rates. The directors do have the rates for 2022 and 2023 and projected 2024 in the financial plan. Like I say, it's just adding the extra 9 years that is complicated.
Yeah, I understood that it was the mill rate. My question was, do we have the final valuation, and does that mill rate change at the end based on the actual valuation or not?
Yeah, before I pass it to Ms. Green, I see our CEO has something for us.
Yeah, let's clarify the question.
Through the chair, and Linda Greening can correct me. You have to remember, we do everything in service silos.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
So you can't get a cumulative mill rate on everything. You get them boiled down per service. And if you look at our tax notices that we get from BC Assessment or from the registered surveyor of taxes.
Surveyor of taxes.
Mm-hmm.
It's broken down by services. Okay.
And the valuation might be different for each service, and because the boundaries are different.
Yeah, so we don't send those out. Remember, we submit them over to the surveyor of taxes, and they're the ones that send them out. Do you want to add to that, Linda?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair. Yes, so the rates that you see are the rates that you will see on the tax notice. There will be a slight change because the assessments are based on the completed roll values, and of course BC Assessment goes through another confirmation process. They may have some some successful tax appeals, assessment appeals. So it will be based on the revised roll plus the first supplement. But generally, if there is a large appeal that's in process, BC Assessment would give us a heads up about that. And we haven't had a heads up that there's any large appeals in progress. So we can generally expect that these rates will not vary. They'll vary very slightly from the revised plus the first supplement. So you could count on these to generally be the rates that will be applied to your tax notices.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Director Gisborne, second round here. Hopefully we can bring it. The motion before us is only to receive this. So, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, and I kind of concur that the motion is only to receive, but we are talking about the other part of the package that was discussed and debated back in January. And our CAO is correct, our services are siloed. So to kind of lump them all together isn't entirely helpful necessarily. It can be for the taxpayer, but for us as a board, we quite often look at like flat costs, like, oh, let's spend $50,000 on X or $12,000 on Y. And when we take a look at the values that we have in front of us, just looking at municipal contribution to regional services, 2020 moving forward goes 74 per 100,000, 72 per 100,000, 63 per 100,000, 61 per 100,000. So over those 4 years, it looks like, wow, the cost of the services are going down, but that's not true. The value of property is going up because there's more variables when you have a rate per 100,000. So that's why for us as a board, I find it more helpful to understand what is the total cost of the service and what is that total cost over a 10-year period. Because if you don't know where you've been, it's very difficult to know where you're going. And to explain to those that may be new and how we got here, in the last term, this information for the per 100,000 was requested by, I believe, Director Brander, not through the board, just requested, and it was provided. This term, I put in the request saying, hey, can we get this updated? And if it needs to be coming from the board, then let's have it come from the board. And that's how it ended up on the January board meeting agenda. So this isn't a request from one director or a different director. This became a request from the board by resolution in January. And what I would like to see is the total cost per service to the taxpayer, because then that can help us as a board understand better the financial decisions that we're making. If it is too onerous on staff to produce that document, I know this puts me into an awkward position. I can go back through all the old financial plans and produce that document, but then it makes me feel like I'm doing the work of staff, but that kind of also then makes me feel like what I'm going to have to do about our meeting schedule. Really, it comes down to, what did the board ask? Does the board want to change direction? And what's fair? So I'm actually going to vote against this because it's not the whole package. It's not an item that was referred from the January meeting. So my apologies.
No need to apologize. So CAO had his hand up, I saw.
Through the chair, I think staff have expressed that they apologize for not being able to have produced it. And I think we leave it at that.
Thank you. So is there any further discussion on this, Director Elliott? I believe you talked twice, but you can be brief, please.
Yeah, I wanted to propose or ask for something that might help us, because I was just trying to learn before and now I have a suggestion. So I think what the idea of the whole getting the information and having the history behind more than the 3 years that we normally get is so that as people change on the board, we have the ability for new board members to understand history. And I think it's a great idea. I don't think we're going to get it this year, and so we're going to have to let that go because the timeliness is not there. But could we develop a way to do this a little more seamlessly for budget periods upcoming, and so that we as a board are working toward having that kind of information presented as a standard piece within our budgeting process that helps all board members, even the new ones, know where the history has been. And for that particular purpose, the rates per 100,000 are not terribly helpful. But because of the valuation up and down and all over the place isn't immediately evident when you're looking at it, and it's difficult to, understand what's going on. So could we not put forward a motion to rescind the need for that particular report this year, but to instead include that type of report as standard information for upcoming budget, like within our practices? Is that something we need to change our procedures for, or like what would we have to do to make that part of our standard process in the future?
Right. I believe we could. I mean, one option I was thinking, and was to put forward a notice of motion to put this on our next finance committee meeting agenda, and then we could actually have a fulsome discussion about it in April, and then that would be before it would come in May, and then we could actually, staff would have time to think through it rather than trying to wordsmith without our corporate officer something. But I'll leave it to the board if. So, okay, is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? One opposed, two opposed, Director Gisborne, Director Lennox. And I'll put forward a notice of motion related to the request for information to be placed on the request for 10-year information to be placed on the April meeting, and I'll come up with a motion before that. Okay, moving on. Correspondence from 6.1, correspondence from Jock McLauchlan, President of Tourism Powell River, requesting for a letter of support. Director McCormick.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to move that letter under business arising from correspondence.
Okay, yes. Okay, so thanks. So, okay, that's the only item. So we're on to 7.1, which is that item. So, Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you. I think Tourism Powell River has done an excellent job of running the Visitor Information Center. So I would move that we send a letter of support for the renewal of their service contract.
Okay, so there's a seconder for that, Director Lennox. So discussion on that item. On our, I can't see anyone. So if someone is having their hand up, speak up. Seeing none, I will then call the question on this. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Carried. Thank you. So great. On to reports. Item 8.1 is the 2024 Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, Emergency Operations Center and Training Grant funding with a recommendation. It's the will of the board. Okay, I can't quite see the board.
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, move the recommendation. Sorry. Okay, second. Perhaps the Shelley. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Is there any discussion on this item? Okay, it seems pretty clear. So then I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Carried. So item 8.2, municipal solid waste tipping fees. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I would like to move that we increase tipping fees by $50 per ton to cover the direct costs of the MSW program.
Okay, there's a seconder for that motion. Seeing none, we don't have a motion on the table. So, CAO?
Through the chair, I'd like to ask Jason Conehoven if this amount of increase is out of line.
Yeah, that was my question. We'll get to Jason, Mr. Conehoven, then I'll recognize Director Doubt. Mr. Conehoven?
If I may, Chair, yes. Through the chair, I believe what would cause us to be out of line is the financial rules that fall under the Local Government Act, and I'd like to request that our Linda Greenan weigh in on that, just to confirm that we have the correct understanding here.
Okay, Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. I think that we also have to include the indirect costs when we're looking at trying to cover our costs with tipping fees. So I think that's something that has to be considered, are the indirect costs as well. So, I don't know, I haven't actually run the numbers, but I think we could go up, definitely could go up further than the $23 increase.
Okay, thank you. Director Doubt.
I don't know what to say now. I was going to move the motion in the package, but now it seems to be that staff is saying it should be something different than the report that they wrote for us. So I really am not comfortable moving the motion now, because I was impressed by the fact that increasing it $23 would actually change the funds coming into the waste resource recovery center. They would change those funds in that service more towards being a cost for service as opposed to taxation. And I was surprised to read that the balance for a taxpayer in the city, which is the electoral area I represent, would actually see a slight decline in taxes, and overall they would be paying less for the service. And that wouldn't be true for everybody. It would depend on the value of your home. The more valuable the home, the more your saving would be in taxes, I assume. But I was prepared to move the motion, but now I'm thinking the CAO and Mr. and everybody is saying, well, gee, maybe it could be a different number. But I would have been happy with the $23. So I'll see how it goes.
Okay, so we don't have a motion on the table, so I'm looking for a motion, ideally, and noting that, you know, if we want it to be in this year's budget, we should do it today. If we can't refer it back. CAO, and then the
Chair, Director Gisborne has moved.
There's no second.
Director, point of order, Chair. Director Dowd began discussing the motion that I moved, and therefore he is automatically the seconder under Robert's rules.
No, I disagree, because I said there was no seconder as chair, and then I recognized Director Dowd believing that he might be making a motion. So that just I'd already said there was no seconder. Director Elliott, you have your hand.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and forgive me, I haven't seconded it, and I wasn't
no, there's no motion to second
just
right
yet. But I wouldn't mind asking a few questions about the report and understanding a few things, so that I could then understand what kind of motion that I might like to support, if that would be okay. Since this is a committee and I'm to learn here, I wanted to have that opportunity.
Okay, so yes, you can ask a question, since that seems to be.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I wasn't. So my understanding is service areas, when we do these kinds of levies, must be related to actual costs. And so it seemed to me the chart said 23 was the actual cost that would be supported. And then there was a column for 50, which I wasn't sure why. I think that was because it was part of a previous motion that we were examining actual cost to figure out what it should be. And I understood the report to be saying we initially said 50, but now we think 23 is the actual cost. And so I was very confused by the motion that was put forward and not understanding why that motion would come forward. Could we have an explanation of the costs that could be supported by the legislation for this area?
Yes, I'll hand it over to Ms. Green, and then I'm not quite sure who would have that answer, but Ms. Green.
Thank you, through the chair. So the costs that could be covered would be indirect costs that go into the, into managing the waste management service. Indirect, there could also be a portion of the recycling costs, because that's part of waste management, could be covered. So, those are other costs that could be covered as well and still be within the legislation. That's the way that I interpret it. But I think I'd like to hand it over to, I think Arnold Schwab wants to answer a question.
Okay, Mr. Schwab.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, I'm just going to clarify here. So that $273 that Mr. Cohenhoven has put forward is direct costs that we know we can account for should an audit happen or should some question come up. I think what everybody's dancing around is the indirect costs, and those, I think no one wants to answer off the top of their head what those could be. If you are looking for an answer today, we probably wouldn't have one. It would be something we could probably account for, but it would take some research to go back to say, this can be accounted for, this is the percentage of time, this is recycling fees. It's not a quick answer, unfortunately, for us. But the 273 that was put forward, we know is a number that we could justify. Thank you.
Since before we, so Director Elliott, and then okay.
I just had a
direct
couple of
your-
questions. Can I ask the few questions that I had, please?
Yeah, yes, you can.
Oh, thank you so much, Chair. So I take it to mean that the 23 is the risk-free amount, and we could go higher, but it's got some risk affiliated with it. And thank you for that answer. The other question is, for the 3 scenarios for changing 523.50, what does that look like for your average person's bag of garbage?
Mr. Schwab?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll have to pass that one over to Mr. Cohenhoven. He is the one who ran the numbers.
Mr. Cohenhoven, do you have numbers on the bags?
Thank you, through the chair. So as far as a bag of garbage goes, we are currently not talking about increasing the minimum charge, and a small bag of garbage typically would not trigger a cost per ton a fee like this. We'd be talking about $7.50 for a bag of garbage under all of these scenarios. And these larger tipping fees would only come in play if we had quite large, like a truckload or so.
Weight scale stuff.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you so much for those answers.
Okay, thank you. There's also, and I saw Director McCormick with her hand.
Well, thank you. I guess I share a bit of the same confusion as Director Elliott, in that when I read on page 3 of the report, it says quite clearly that $23 is the increase that we need to make everything balance. And now I'm hearing from staff that that isn't the case. So, Chair, I'd just like some clarification about that.
Okay,
Is
I'll pass it over.
$23 the amount to
That's the risk
cover the cost?
Well, I'll paraphrase first what I've understood and then hand it over to Mr. Cohenhoven. The direct cost, we can charge costs, but the direct costs that we can attribute are $23 increase. So that's supported by direct costs. That's safe, low risk. But we could also attribute indirect costs, but that will require more work to go figure out what those indirect costs might be, to articulate those, and there may be some risk associated with that, and time. Mr. Cohenhoven?
Thank you, through the chair. To be as clear as possible, through our current MSW process, we pay 3 different contractors to handle and transport our garbage. The costs of those are included in contracts with CPI escalators, and this year the cost is $273 just for those very direct 3 functions. Traditionally, that's how we've set our MSW fees in the bylaw, is by looking at those 3 contracts. The conversation about increasing it further than the $23, we start to move into new territory where we are considering those indirect costs, such as staffing and facility overhead. These are things that are going to change as our process changes with the RRC. And so if we were to review it now, we could come up with a number, but that number will change very soon, and we'd have to revisit it again and effectively do that work twice. So I hope this provides clarity as to why we arrived at the $23, and that is just what we are currently experiencing as our costs, which I can just confirm in January. Our cost to send everything down to Washington was $272 per ton. So this is already happening right now.
Thank you. Does that address your question? Okay,
Yes,
so
thank
one
you.
more question we'll let, so the Director Gisborne, and then, yeah. Go ahead, Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. Big thank you for our staff on the staff report. I recall in last month, we I'd thrown out the number about $50 increase rather than the 23. And there's the line in here that there is an option to raise the MSW tipping fee beyond $273 to help cover other overhead and indirect costs, including administration, staff, illegal dumping, shoreline cleanup, and others. Because my understanding of historical context was, that we had, essentially Augusta being our waste transfer station. And now we are looking at getting our resource recovery center up and operational. So it's not, really the simple case of, okay, Augusta takes the waste, this is the bill to deal with it, and that's kind of it. Now we have a facility, we're going to have staff costs, we've got the cost of the facility, and that's why, my mind was, okay, let's look at $50 increase, and I would actually even go higher, because the cost of dealing with the waste is what we're talking about here. This is the great thing about what the CAO said at the last motion. We have siloed services. Increasing the tipping fee doesn't mean that we put more money to water or parks or anything like that. It's for dealing with the solid waste. So if we did a $50 increase, my question to staff is, can that be defended in terms of the additional costs around administration, staff wages, illegal dumping and shoreline cleanup and stuff like that? Because I understand that staff are going to continue to work on this, and we'll get a more updated, in-depth amount of, how much are these indirect costs. And I would presume that they're going to be more than $27 increase over the $23, because 23 plus 27 is 50. And I'm just thinking about the public, so that, we don't have a huge increase again coming forward down the line. And I think an extra $27 actually would fit within those indirect costs, especially, there's the C&D increase, and you're seeing stuff on social media about people talking about illegal dumping. Well, if we got to start accepting illegal dumping stuff, well, that's going to be another indirect cost. And we're talking about waste management here. We're not talking about taking money to put towards other services. It's about dealing with the garbage. So do we have more, what is the timeline for getting these more in-depth assessments, or do we have to wait until after the RRC is fully operational to really get into the nuts and bolts? And could we defend 50
today?
Today,
so let's get the question to staff. So Mr. Cohenhoven, could we defend $50?
Thank you, through the chair. So this increase that we're talking about, this would generate $167,000 of additional revenue over and above the $273 tipping fee. At this point in time today, I would not be comfortable saying that I can justify these kinds of overhead costs. When the RRC facility is open, we're paying those wages, we're paying off the debt for the facility, and we begin paying our operations contract. Yes, I believe at that point we could justify a larger fee.
Thank you. So if there's no other questions, Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to add my voice. I think you're hearing a general expression. We want services to pay for themselves, but I think your explanation of our auditing process and what's defensible is important to this. But we also have a goal of getting this information as soon as possible. So I think your conclusion is exactly what we're looking for, is that we are going to be reviewing this as soon as possible, and staff will be bringing us this information. So like I said, I'd like to vote for whatever the number is that will pay for the service. Thank you.
Thank you. So Director Elliott, you have another question?
So it sounds like it's a bit of a shoot in the dark. We can defend higher than 23, but not 50. So I could make a motion and make it 30, and then we're risk managing that extra 7. That gets us part of the way there. And we're going to assess later, because we have to set the budget and stuff today, soon. We don't have the luxury to wait for the actual information. And so I would be prepared to put that motion forward at 30 if people second it.
There's a motion on the table, the one in the package, but with 23 changed to 30. So discussion on this motion, Director Lennox.
I guess the same question to staff, is that defensible?
Mr. Cohenhoven, are we safe with 30? No, taking into account what you've already told us, that more work would be needed. So How risky is this, I guess, is the real question.
Through the chair, I believe that it is a much lower risk position. We do have some overhead costs and administrative costs that I think we could quickly tie into the calculation, and I am more comfortable with this lower number. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Is there any other discussion on this item? CAO?
Through the chair, you've got Director Doubt trying to get your attention.
Sorry. Thank you. I only see so many people on the screen, and sometimes slides off. Director Doubt, my apologies. Floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks for recognizing me. And I'm willing to bet, like everybody else, that we can justify this. I'd really like to have a report that said we could, but I'm willing to guess so we can move ahead.
Thank you for that. So, okay, I think this is good. Is there any further discussion on this? So it's bring 30. So hopefully we can bring it to a vote. We've had a lot of discussion and question. Now, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, so I'm looking at our financial plan from the February Finance Committee meeting, and I'm looking at the waste management service. I see a value of waste disposal budgeted $800,000. I see waste transport as $600,000. Waste handling, a little small, $300,000. Is that 273 cost? Is that all three of those, or is that just waste disposal? Like that's kind of what I'm wondering. Like,
Mr. Conehoven,
when we're talking about risk, it's like, what other things can we take a look at here? And
Mr. Conehoven.
Thank you, through the chair. You're correct. We are talking about the waste handling, waste transport, and waste disposal lines that you're seeing in the budget, and only those things. So anything else related to MSW that's landing in other accounts, such as our wages, our staff wages, to oversee those costs or administer the payments for those contracts, the illegal dumping, and those are all that come to mind on the top of my head right now. But the $273 is just those three waste handling, transport, and disposal accounts that you're looking at.
Oh, thank you. That was a pretty good shot in the dark for me, I guess. Yeah, because I'm taking a look at the list and I see like $400,000 for salary and wages, $116 for payroll benefits, and it goes down, contractor wages, depot operations. So myself, I think it is defensible, the $7 increase. I would also feel comfortable with a higher increase, but it is the will of the board ultimately that at the end of the day, if we ever do get audited, I think, what does the board feel justified, based on staff recommendation. We've heard today as a board or finance committee that 50 might be a little bit difficult to defend. The $7 above, I think, is a relatively low risk. So I think that we as a collective assembly can feel comfortable and confident that the $7 above is reasonable within the indirect costs, because as we're all seeing all across the province, the cost of waste disposal is more than just what we pay the contractor to take it down to Washington. So a big thank you to our chair and our staff for the input, and I think that we've arrived on a number that we can feel comfortable with, and I look forward to finding out the new information moving forward.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. I'll just add my comments, which we all recognize we're making a risk-managed decision here if we vote yes, but I think it's mitigated by the fact it's a relatively modest level of risk. So, and I think we're all seeming to be in agreement, in general agreement, that we want service to be covered by the users that are using waste management. So I think we've heard information to say that this, we're putting a little bit on staff, but maybe not, too much, hopefully, to find the justification for this, and we'll hear back. And then I also, staff, the other item I want to mention is that this will come back. I mean, this is for this year. we're setting it, and we will have information down the road as the Resource Recovery Center gets done, and we'll revisit this, I'm sure, as more clarity comes. Okay, is there any final thoughts on this before I call the question? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, carries unanimously. Very good. Okay, on to item 8.3, and I have an alternate motion that I would like to put forward. Right, there's 3 items, but for the first one, 8.31, and I've passed it to Shelley. So what I'd like to propose, and if I get a seconder for this, I'll explain what it is. But the motion is specifying the amounts in each. The 96 actually, right? This was a bit of a suggestion from Ms. Green, and so with some information from her. But the committee recommend the board direct staff to set the electoral grant and aid budgets as follows. And I think the $96,000 general grant and aid should come out. That's not part of it. Is the other 3. So $84,321.10 for area A, $27,902 for B, $38,994.1 for C, $28,455 and 80 cents for D, and $11,227 for E. And the 96,000 isn't part of this because we've already passed that. So if there's a seconder for that, I will explain where this comes from and why I think it might be a solution. Director Brander, thank you. I'll speak to this. So where this comes from, and I'll walk you through, is basically we've already set our general grants and aid to $96,000. And we based that in large part on the actuals from 2023. Last meeting, we decided to reallocate $86,000 from social planning to the electoral areas, and that was based on the actuals from 2023. What this proposal is putting forward is to set the amounts for each electoral area, local grant and aid budgets, to the actuals from 2023. In other words, when you add it up, it adds up to $286,000, which is what we spent last term, so we can support groups at exactly the same level, covered by each electoral area at exactly the same level. And I'll walk you through with one example so you can see where I'm coming from, and I'll use area A just because I'll pick on Director Lennox's area for fun. So if you go to page 4 of 8, so the provided by Ms. Green, and thank you for all that. So electoral area A had a budget last year of $8,889 plus its contributions to economic development and social planning. The amount actually spent was $27,493. So that's part of what the proposal that I put forward has is $27,493. Further over to the right is the contribution from social planning, which is $38,166. And down below, the table below is economic development. The actual for economic development was $33,333. So the portion attributed to electoral area A is I don't know, it's approximately half of that, 16,000. So if you add 16,000 plus the 27,000 that was actually spent, plus the social planning portion from the actuals, that adds to the amount in the motion. And so I calculated those numbers, confirmed them with Ms. Green. And so they're basically, what it would do is keep our grant levels at exactly the same level as last year. It would keep the funding sources at exactly the same as last year, the actuals. It would allow us to support groups at the same level as we did last year, and it would help us set the stage for moving forward with the kind of revised way we're doing grants and aid, and help us actually have a principled way of deciding on what levels of grants and aid to set this year. And so in other words, the principle is all the grants and aid, general grants and aid, the redistributed social planning, the redistributed economic development, and our local grants and aid are all set based on 2023 actuals. And that helps us get through this confusion of the changes, and then lets us go forward. And if this under discussion, if any area would like to revise the amount they wish to provide for they think it might be higher or lower for their local area grants, that I think can be entertained. But this lets us just say that we're going to provide the ability to support levels at the same level as last year. Thank you. So if there any further discussion on that, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I'd like the motion to be split to pull area B's grant and aid to be separate on its own motion.
So we don't have a corporate officer. I'd have to are we able to do that? Are they
Yep.
corporate CAO?
Yeah, I believe by pulling that out, the intent could still stand on its own.
Okay, so that's pulled. So it's partitioned off for area B. So any further, is there any discussion on the rest of it, which is the actual, basically setting the levels at the actuals? Director Gisborne.
Yeah, first I'd like to thank the chair for this motion. I think it's a lot clearer than the motion that was in the package, you know, setting the amounts. The issue though I see, and this is why I pulled area B's out, is that at last year's grant discussions that we had, there was a lot of confusion, contention, and issues around, you know, how much money is available for which kind of initiatives. I do recall the matter of, you know, Lasqueti Island had been paying into general grant for a number of things, and Lasqueti wasn't getting, you know, a fair shake in terms of what was coming back in return. In the end, there wasn't enough money in general grant and aid to, you know, make up the difference for Lasqueti and to provide funding for things like the CRC. So we ended up using social planning to provide grants to what could arguably be, you know, regional benefit. But there wasn't enough money in general grant and aid because we had allocated essentially all of general grant and aid, and therefore we're using whatever was left. So simply using last year's values and, you know, that we have the same contributions from each electoral area, I think means that we're just going to copy and paste what we came to last year when we handed out the grants. But if we recall, a lot of us were very unhappy with how that got allocated. But this is the challenge of we set our budget and then we get the grant requests and then we got to use essentially what money we have in which pots before we then find out who wants what and which areas benefit. So at our board meeting, we've set $96,000 for general grant and aid. If we want to change that, that would have to be, you know, a motion to rescind or motion to change. But I think the values that, you know, we end up deciding on as a board, I'm not sure if simply having them reflect the contribution from last year will avoid the problems that we had last year, where there were certain areas that were, you know, paying too much or too little, because I did agree with what came up last year, which was, you know, Lasqueti should be getting some of that general money because they've been paying into general grant and aid, but we ended up using social planning, which meant it was just the electoral areas making up the difference. And I don't find that to be entirely fair. This is why I asked for area B's to be pulled off. And after we deal with this one, which is areas A, C, D, and E, then we'll get to area B and I'll be putting forward a different value. Thank you, Chair.
Is there any further discussion on this? Director Lennox.
Yeah, I also thank the chair for this motion because I was confused by the one in our on our agenda. So I appreciate your description of how we got to these numbers. You know, I'm a little newer to this, so for area A, as I look at a 10-year summary, sorry, that's okay. You know, the number has increased dramatically the last 2 years. I would hate to, you know, I don't want to take away from the opportunity to support our community, but I've noticed a significant jump in the last 2 years, and I'm sure there's good reason for that. Director Gisborne's concerns around allocation, we're hoping that those will be resolved by the combination of these, you know, accounts, if we want to call them that way. But I am much more prepared to vote in favor of this motion to continue to support the community. But I'll be looking at that figure over time to see if it's a little too much for our constituents. So I just don't have the experience to recommend to reduce that number just yet. Thanks.
Yeah. And of course we can, when the grants go out, whatever surplus goes back into next year and can be used to inform. Okay, is there any further debate and discussion on the item on the table? Okay, seeing none, I'm looking at Director Gibbs without on the screen. I don't see his hand up either, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, carried. Okay, so now Director Gisborne, what would you like to put forward?
I would like to move that Area B's grant and aid contribution be set at $16,000. 16000.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Okay, thank you. Is there a discussion on this, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I'm very thankful for the historical summary that was put forward by staff. And it shows Area B's contribution going from around $7,000 in 2013, 7,000 in 2014, just under 7 in 2015, then going up to 11, then 9.8. 2018 jumped up to 18,000, and then went down to 14,000, 17,000 in 2020, and then 15 up to 16 in 2022, and then down to 14,000 in 703. So I was originally thinking, well, going along those lines, 15,000 would kind of be in alignment, but then again, let's go up to $16,000 because, of course, we do have inflationary issues. And I think that brings us a little bit more in alignment with the historical context of electoral Area B's grant and aid. And I think that is something that can be a little bit more defensible to my constituents out in Area B. And just for other members of the board, Area B does not have typically high house values. We don't have, large industrial operations like up in Oakover with your wonderful Run of the River project, which is why Area A's value is so high, and that's why we always try and steal a little bit of their money each year. Sorry, Director Lennox. And yeah, there's hydroelectric dams and other things like that. But Area B is typically residential properties, farmland, and also a great deal of the City of Powell River's community forest is in Area B as well. So I think the value of $16,000 is a reasonable amount. It is higher than it has been historically, but I think it does bring forward a bit of balance for what we're dealing with. And the reason for that also is the general grant and aid, which I'm using as kind of like a guide, has been set at $96,000 for 3 years in a row now. It's not going up even by consumer price index. So I think Area B going up, even more than consumer price index, I think is reasonably generous. And I would be comfortable going above, but I don't want to find ourselves in the same situation we found ourselves in last year where we run out of general grant and aid, and therefore we start grabbing what we can from the electoral areas.
Yeah, Director Brander.
Actually, I'll let Ms. Greenan comment.
Oh.
I see your hand up.
Oh, Ms. Greenan?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention through the chair that the $16,000 that Director Gisborne that you were pointing out doesn't include the allocation from social planning that is now planned to be reallocated to the electoral area grants and aid.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Ms. Green, can I ask a clarification? So if this motion passed, what would be the amount for Area B, including that? Would it be 16,000 plus the 13,199? Is that what the effect of that would be?
Thank you, Chair. I think that what Director Gisborne wants is to set his grant and aid at 16,000, including the amount that was traditionally included in social planning, if that's the way I understand it.
That's what I understand too. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Director Brander?
First off, could you remind me what the proposed contribution from Area B was in the previous motion?
So the proposal was 27,902, and that consists of 13,199. Sorry, the actuals, which was 14,703, which was the Area B local grants plus the contribution of Area B tied to the economic development grants, plus 13,199, which was the contribution of their portion attributed to the social planning redistribution.
Okay.
And the amount that was tied to the economic development grants was $6,667.14. That was my estimate about that.
Okay, thank you. So from what I understand, if we don't go with the amount discussed in the previous motion, then Area B will not be able to contribute their portion of the grants that we gave out, if we gave out the same grants that we did in 2023, which would essentially hogtie the other electoral areas in the city, because then we either have to pick up the slack or we can't support the organizations. So I like the initial number, the 27,902, because of the fact that it would allow us to do these things. And I'm going to vote against the 16,000 that has been suggested here in this motion.
Director Gisborne, or Director Elliott, and then Director Gisborne, because she has.
I've heard a number of times that Area B wasn't part of the economic development one. So how could they have attributed a number for that? I'm not sure. I got confused.
It was when grants were attributed to economic development, Area B.
They would put their share in?
A portion that was prorated based on, you know, their relative proportion of population. So how much they would have paid if they had been in the ECDEV. So that's how it's been working since I've been on the board.
And they usually pulled that out of their area grant aid.
So for example, if Prisma had received $20,000, then that would be a certain amount from the economic development service and a certain amount from Area B local grant and aid that would be used to cover that. And we've been doing that. If you look back in the motions, that's how it's been done when the economic development service did that. Does that answer your question, or do you want me to ask? Maybe Ms. Greenan can clarify a bit better than I did. Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. I think that you explained it correctly. I just wanted to, I think though what we're talking about here is the $16,000 was traditionally spent from Area B, allocated from Area B, including the Area B portion of the economic development. But what would be missing then would be an additional allocation for the grants that were traditionally funded from social planning.
Yeah. Okay, so Director McCormick, and then I'm on the list, and then Director Gisborne. Director McCormick.
Thank you. Further to Director Brander's point, is there any recourse but to take the missing funds from Area B if the 16,000 was adopted out of the other areas? Is there any other way to ensure that our contribution, that our ability to make grants is the same as last year? Is there any recourse other than taking it out of all the other areas to make up for Area B?
No, in short.
That's a problem.
Okay, so I'm on the list. I'm actually going to move an amendment. I'm going to move to amend the 16,000 to 20,000. And if I get a seconder, I'll explain why 20,000. Director McCormick. So I sympathize with Director Gisborne's wish to curtail, you know, the amount from the local, but the whole basis of our revised grant and aid structure is that we work together and share, and that we got to let the smoke clear a bit before we really get a handle on how we're going to figure out the shared ones, and that requires cooperation. And so the 20,000, if it was set to 20,000, that would be a balance, because that would be, if you look on on table on page 4, the amount that is attributed to Area B for the social planning is 13,199. Let's just call it 13,000, and the amount that is was attributed to Area B for that was required or taken from Area B for economic development related grants was about 6,700. So that's about 20,000. So setting it at 20,000 would not limit. That would allow all the grants that were shared that were across more than one electoral area to be supported as they were last year. But it would not leave anything for local Area B grants and aid, and if Director Gisborne does not wish to have any provision for that, other than the fact that we may not support the same level as last year, then I'm willing to support that. So I think it's an intermediate position. So as amendment on the table, so the motion on the table is an amendment to change 16 from 16 to 20, and it's been seconded. So is there any discussion on that, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I share the concerns around the table that, you know, our grant and aid, if there's an application that has a regional benefit, that we all work collaboratively to pay collaboratively from the entire region. And this is something that's come up multiple times in the past where we get an application and there's not enough money in general grant and aid. And therefore we start taking what's left over from the electoral areas to make up the difference. And that's been an issue. That was an issue last year. We used up the general grant and aid. So we started taking the electoral area money to make up the difference for what should be regional benefit. This board made a decision that we would not change the regional contribution, which meant that we decided to say, you know what? That cost funding issue that we've had a problem with, we're not going to fix it. We're going to leave it as is. And what that means is, well, I guess the electoral areas will continue to make up the difference rather than the entire region. And on that line, that's why I am putting forward a reduction for electoral area B's grant and aid. And if the other electoral areas are concerned that they're going to have to pay extra to make up the difference for grant requests that are regional in nature, then I would suggest that they too consider either reducing their electoral area grant and aid, or we increase the general grant and aid. Because if there's a general benefit for an application, and keep in mind that every time we have an application, we deal with them as a one-off item. We look at, you know, an application from Lyft for the CRC, we look at it as a standalone item. We don't get into the details of all the other applications. We deal with them one at a time. And because I have been seeing this occurring over and over, where we run into the situation where we would love to use general grant and aid, but there's not enough money in it, therefore the electoral areas will make up the difference. That makes me feel very uncomfortable. So that's why I put forward 16,000. And I also would like to thank the chair for putting forward 20,000, which is less than the 27. And I actually think I am comfortable enough to go along with 20,000. Because yes, it is a reduction, but I still think that all the electoral areas should be concerned about not allocating a sufficient amount of money set aside in general grant and aid. And just because we allocate money in general grant and aid or electoral area grant and aid doesn't actually mean that we will spend it. It just means we have it available so that if at a later date in the year we decide to use it based on the applications, we have that option. But what keeps happening is we run into the option where there's not enough in general grant and aid, so we take it from whatever electoral areas are left over. And I don't want to see, you know, I don't want to see Texada having to make up the difference. I don't want to see Area A having to make up the difference. I really like the idea of who benefits should also be, should be the really contributing factor, not whoever's got money left in their pocket. So I'm actually in favor of this amendment, and I thank the chair for putting it forward.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. Director Elliott. So remember, the amendment right now, the motion on the table is the amendment to go to 20,000 from 16. That's what we're discussing. Director Elliott.
I am in favor of the amendment, and I wanted to just speak to the concept of the full granting package being attributable here at the regional district to general. You know, there's the electoral areas and the general. The city is also an area, but we manage that through a different government over at the city. We have a fairly generous granting program that benefits the entire region, that comes through the community forest, through our permissive tax exemptions, and through our own grants and aids programs for many things that don't just, they do benefit the entire region. And so the rationale that put forward that the only way to look at everybody contributing to a regional benefit is through the general grants and aid managed by our board is not conducive to partnerships working together, nor is it a full picture of how we all can contribute. And it does become a little bit us and them, and disincentivizes the city to go forward with grants that take into consideration the entire region through programs like the community forest, because we are not being applied credit to this system of give and take. So I just wanted to make that point, because I'm hearing it over and over, and it is frustrating. Should we be then taking a fuller picture of all grants and aids that go through both governments when we're looking at all of this? Because I think you'd find the areas are not caught up, and you're not giving due consideration to the city and the contributions we make. And it frustrates me just a little bit. So I wanted to make that point.
Is there any more discussion on the amendment? So seeing none, the amendment is to change 16,000 to 20,000. I'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? None opposed. Carried. Now we're on the main motion, which is to set Area B to 20,000. We've had a healthy discussion. Is there any further debate on that? Well, okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Carried. Thank you. We've got two other items on the agenda. On one other item, which is that the direction be provided by motion at the that any direction provided by motion at this at the February 28th. Sorry. Any direction provided by motion at the February 28, 2024 board meeting and at this meeting today be incorporated into the final plan, and that the 2024 financial plan be incorporated into a financial plan bylaw to be presented at our March 28th board meeting. Director Gisborne?
So moved.
So moved. Second. Director Lennox, is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All in favor. Looks like we're moving forward with our financial plan. Ms. Green, and you got some resolution on something. So we have no new business, which is great. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion. No new business question period. Is there anyone in the room? And Mr. Galinsky, do you have any questions for us?
Galinsky from the Peak here. Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions at this point. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. We were obviously very clear, which is good. So we have an in-camera session. Would someone like to read the motion?
It would be my pleasure. I move that the committee move in camera that the meeting be closed to the public on the grounds that the subject matter to be considered relates to matters covered by the community charter under section 91. K8, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a regional district service that are at their preliminary stages, and that, in the view of the committee, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the regional district if they were held in public, and then the consideration of whether a committee meeting should be closed under provision of this subsection or subsection 2.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Director Lennox, any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? We're going in camera, and thanks, Director Gisborne. That was only half a breath for you for that one. It was a short one. Okay, so we're going in camera.
Guys didn't do it right because Michelle was.
You know, they say a 5% increase of nothing is still nothing.
Yeah. Hey, Shelley, are you there?
Hey, I'm sorry, just one sec, just removing
There it is. Did you let Roger in?
It's too late.